We are in John. We are in the 128th lesson in John. We are in the 20th chapter. And we're going to find Jesus outside of the empty tomb once again tonight. We've been working our way through this resurrection chapter for several weeks, and this is our fourth week of what I'm calling a mini-series in the series. We've been working on resurrection not just as a historical event in the life of Jesus, and not just as the foundation of the Christian faith, because it is, but as a theological topic, as something that we should investigate what it says deeper into the New Testament. So we've ran off to some of Paul's writings. We're going to do that again tonight. I have been intentionally only giving you little blocks of the Pauline theology of resurrection, so that the next week we can give a little more. And I have just been allowing whatever of Paul's resurrection material really fits in with the theme of our John 20. So that's why it's a little scattered. And for those who watch this and are picking up this portion, because we've had some jump in because of this topic. In fact, I heard from someone who said, I've been waiting for this in the book of John. And so I know there's people kind of coming to the party because resurrection is the topic. So for those doing that, we're scattering. There's kind of no rhyme or reason to where we end up or where we go, because we have weeks and weeks of being able to pull from some of those passages. And what we're really trying to do, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of resurrection, but I think I am trying to rediscover what I think Paul taught, the early church taught, which I don't think is exactly what a lot of us talk about when we talk about resurrection. So I'm not really trying to establish some off-the-wall thought process. I'm trying to get us to think more in terms of the Apostle Paul. I set you up tonight with that statement because we'll get into some things right out of the gate in which we have to question a little bit of author intent on why they're telling us what they're telling us. And we have to wrestle once again with the concept and the idea that perhaps we've had some insertion into this text from a later date. That maybe some things that fall into the 20th chapter are added later, and then we'll get into that in chapter 21, that maybe that's added as well. And so how do we navigate that? Not always easy to do. It's best to be upfront about it, though, realize that it does happen. And then how do we deal with that as Bible students, and how do we handle it? So we're going to try to do that, and to start with, my subtitle tonight is He Passed Through the Heavens, because as we get to the second half of the lesson tonight, we're going to get into this reality that Hebrews will tell us, that Jesus passed through the heavens. And what does that mean? Why are we talking about it in John 20? And what does it have to do with us? So to begin with, we start right at a text that we used last week, but we shift gears a little bit. Last week we dealt with that ark, those two angels sitting inside. I'm going to remind you of this because we're going to have to have this knowledge. So if you didn't watch or listen to last week, here's your setup. There are two angels in the tomb, one at the head, one at the feet of where the body used to be. That is a Hebrew image of the Ark of the Covenant, two cherubims over the top of what was the mercy seat with blood on it, called the Ark of the Covenant, in the most holy place in the back of the temple, the seat of God on the earth. Whenever Mary enters the tomb, there are two angels, no body in between, and I think the image is being repeated, that here is the ark, here is the coffin, and that things go inside of that, not to be peered at again. They are to be left there. Then she turns and faces Jesus in the garden, and this is us moving from the place of our death to the place of our life, going from the place of what we lay down to the place of what we pick up. Christianity is not merely about laying down your burdens and your sins. Christianity is about picking up the new creation mantle and then walking forward in the garden. We have emphasized as the heartbeat of the gospel for a long time, come to Jesus, lay your burdens down. We don't need to stop there. That's not the end of the gospel. It's the beginning of the gospel, but it's not the end of the gospel. The gospel is come to Jesus, lay your burdens down, and then follow him into a new creation. Go where he goes. We're disciples of him, so walk where he walks. And that's sort of what we're seeing happen in this garden story, of that turning that Mary does, Mary Magdalene. She looks into the tomb and then turns. So I don't want to pick up at the turn because it contextually doesn't make sense. So let's have her say a couple of the things that we heard last week in John 20, 13, 14. Then we're going to have her turn to look to Jesus. They are the angels inside the tomb. They say to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She says to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Now when she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. I wanted to bring you to the turn. Really what I want there is 14. I needed 13 because 14 doesn't make sense without it. And so we've had that turn towards Jesus, and the crucial line is at the end. She did not know that it was Jesus. I don't like to say the same things over and over again, but this is definitely worth repeating. Her mental acumen about what she was seeing doesn't line up with the quality of revelation she receives. He gives her her name and a revelation of resurrection. And her quality of what she's looking at is pretty weak. Her theology's bad. She doesn't know it's him. She thinks it's a gardener. She doesn't believe he's resurrected. And the reason I bring that up is go easy on people who don't have all their things lined up theologically, because you don't have to have everything lined up theologically to have a resurrection revelation. Yeah. To have a revelation of a risen Christ. And in fact, sometimes you muddy the waters by the stuff you think you know. And so come to it just looking at the man. And as you look at the man, let him reveal what he will reveal to you so that you can move forward into that. So that's always worth repeating. And I always like to think of that every time I go back to the tomb and see that as I go, she didn't have it right, but he didn't care. So if you don't have it right, it's not the end. You're not disqualified from seeing something in him or knowing him. That leads me to this thought. John makes an issue of them not recognizing Jesus. He makes an issue of it in our text in John 20, and he makes an issue of it in John 21:4, a text we're not to yet, but that is the beach scene where Jesus shows up on the shoreline. Peter and the disciples are fishing, and they look and see a man on the shore, but they do not know that it is Jesus. John does it 2 times. No other gospel account does this. And what I mean by that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not make a big deal out of them looking at Jesus and not knowing who they're looking at. And as we've done 100 times in this study, when you see something new that hasn't been done in the other gospels, ask yourself why the gospel writer would bother. Surely it's not just because. And so what is John trying to get across that the other gospels don't? Now I do throw in the one instance in which they don't recognize what they see. The Emmaus Road. 2 disciples traveling the road to Emmaus from Jerusalem, that 7-mile walk. And the text says that they were restrained from knowing him. And so Luke goes out of his way, actually, to explain that they couldn't tell who they were talking to because their eyes were sort of spiritually blinded so that he could be revealed to them through the scripture, not revealed to them through any other way. But outside of that, there's no sort of incidental moments where they looked at him but they couldn't tell who he was. But you do in John, which is interesting to me. This is an interesting take in that it shows a distinction between the way a natural man looks and the way the resurrected man looks. And then we have a repeated hands inside argument. Now what I say repeated hands inside argument is it's going to be emphasized in the garden, the scars, and then it's going to be emphasized to Thomas. Put your hand in my hand. Open his coat. Put your hand in my side. Spirit doesn't have flesh and blood like this. John does that twice. That repeated hands inside argument that he inserts seems to undermine this argument. I put a question mark up there because I question whether he inserted it. Okay? I don't know that the hands and feet in argument of John 20 and John 21, most ancient Bible scholars, those who look at the work in antiquity, see a very fragmented and broken way of presentation in John 20 and in John 21. And what I mean by that sort of broken and fragmented presentation is that they don't think what we're reading was original to the first writer. And so somewhere along the way, what we might have is some tack on either by scribes or some tack on by late or early 2nd century writers, those who begin to spread that Gospel of John. The reason I bring that up is is to just be honest, because I don't think the best way to approach was this authentic is to ignore it. But also because, to me, making the repeated hands inside argument sort of undermines the argument of they didn't recognize him when they looked at him. They didn't recognize him when they looked at him. He does it twice. And the reason I say that they're a little bit like this is because when you're arguing that they didn't recognize him, you're arguing that the look you get in a resurrected form is nothing like the natural man. So much so that if you looked at it, you wouldn't know exactly what you were looking at because they're not the same thing. It's not Jesus of Nazareth. It's glorified Christ, a resurrected man on the earth. To then insert the hands and feet argument or the hands and side argument is to try to bring Jesus into the natural realm where you can touch glorified bodies. And they are a lot like our body, except not like our body. And that argument really struggles when you get to Paul. By the way, Paul came first in his theology over the Gospels. And Paul's resurrection theology is different because Paul's resurrection theology works on establishing an entirely different kind of body when you're resurrected. Not, and this is a statement we've used a few weeks now, Paul does not argue for the resuscitation of a dead corpse. Dead body, resurrection is breathe into it and it stands up. Now it won't die again. That's not Paul's theology of resurrection. And so we have to consider that when we look at the John version of this and say, what is resurrected Jesus? What did he look like? They didn't recognize him when they saw him. And you could say, well, they didn't recognize him when they saw him because they didn't expect him to be resurrected. Well, that's possible. But they look right at him and don't recognize what they see until there's something else that's vocalized. So rather than pushing off, we've done this all 3 weeks, we've pushed off the resurrection stuff to the end of the lesson. You know, we've taught John and then right at the end we do 10 minutes of, okay, we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to insert it right here because I think the best way to really understand what's happening at the tomb is to understand the theology of the early church in regards to resurrection. Okay, so I want to take you to 1 Corinthians 15, and tonight we're going to do an 11-verse chunk. So we're going to eat up a little bit of time, I'll warn you from the top, of working Paul's passage. Now, we're not going to exhaust it, but I do want to lay out some of Paul's framework. And Paul's very good at comparative analogies. He loves allegory and he loves comparative allegory. Remember his Galatians argument? Hagar is one covenant, Sarah is one covenant, Jerusalem now is, Jerusalem from above. He loves doing that. He's going to do it really, really well with his resurrection argument. Let's work through it slowly. 1 Corinthians 15:35. Someone will say, how are the dead raised up and with what body do they come? Foolish one. What you sow is not made alive unless it dies. I want to take a lot of time outs on this. Okay? Not to exhaust the theology of it, but just to watch the common sense argument. Paul's argument is not a lot different than what people would argue now in regards to resurrection. Go, how in the world can dead people raised up? What body do they come up with? I've actually heard almost everyone I've ever talked to resurrection about, even believers, ask those two questions. Because they'll say things like, well, what's going to happen to the bodies? They've all dissolved. How's God going to bring all the atoms back together? What about people who died in the ocean and their bodies, they were ate up by sharks? How's God going to bring all that back together? What about people who were cremated and then their ashes were scattered into the wind? Is God going to gather all those ashes back up and make a body? Guys, that's those questions. Somebody's going to ask, how are dead people raised up? What body are they coming out of the ground with? What's Paul's answer? Foolish. Okay, so first response is, that's a stupid question. That's Paul's answer. Now, I wouldn't say it that way. He did, all right? Just want to point that out. I didn't say that. He said that. He goes, hey, that's a stupid question. Why is that a stupid question? What you sow isn't made alive unless it dies. God has a game plan. God has an end game. And the only way to get a tree to grow, a plant to grow, is for the seed to go into the ground and effectively die. The seed has to break open. When the seed breaks open, it grows. Jesus said this to a group of Gentiles one time. We studied this. A bunch of Gentiles come to Jesus. They want to see Jesus. One of his disciples comes to him and goes, these guys want to see you. Jesus goes, unless a seed of corn falls on the ground and dies, it can't produce fruit. And you go, what? What am I supposed to go tell them? That's what I always think when I read that. I go, what? The point Jesus makes is, I'm going to the cross to die. I'm not here for them. If I don't go die, I can't bring forth the kind of fruit that's going to bless the Gentiles. I'm here first for the house of Israel. I have to go die in order to produce for the rest of the world. Okay, that's a precursor to Paul's theology of resurrection. It's Jesus saying the only way we can get to a new world is to die in the old one. So I have to go to the cross. It doesn't do me any good to meet a bunch of Gentiles in this natural world. The only way I can affect those Gentiles is to give them a new creation. So how are we going to do that? Got to die on a cross before we can raise from the dead. What's Paul's answer? Foolish one, whatever you sow can't live unless it dies. So death then, for Paul, is viewed as the necessary step to get to spiritual life. For Paul, he goes, God has an end game and you ain't it. But God's end game is better than this, and this has to die so that that can get up and live. And he goes, so stop comparing the two. It's a stupid question, he said, to ask where the body's going to come from. Okay, but why is that a stupid question? It seems pretty valid. We've been fighting over cremation for 2,000 years in the church because of that question. Like, how's God going to reassemble? And Paul goes, no, they're not the same thing. Whatever you sow, you don't sow the body that shall be. You sow mere grain. And then he jumps off into an analogy. Perhaps wheat or some other grain. In other words, whatever you're trying to grow, you don't plant what you're trying to grow. You plant the seed for what you're trying to grow. So if you want the grain, if you want bread, you don't put a loaf of bread in the ground and cover it with dirt and pour water on it and go, okay, this is how we're going to get more bread. He goes, no, they're two entirely different things. The wheat and the bread comes from the wheat, but you don't get wheat out of sticking bread in the ground, and you don't get bread out of sticking wheat in the ground. They're a whole different thing, but closely related, and so Paul relates them closely. Now stay with him. This is a beautiful analogy, and he's going to sidetrack a little bit. He's got a lot of preacher in him. So he's going to come out here and bump against rabbits for a second, but we're going to bump there with him and then we're going to come back. So watch how he handles it. 38. God gives it a body as he pleases. Every seed gets its own body. Okay, now here's where he runs a little bit. Let's run with him. All flesh, not the same flesh. There's flesh of men. There's flesh of animals. There's flesh of fish. There's flesh of birds. 40. There's also celestial bodies. And there are terrestrial bodies. So he goes, there's stuff up there, and there's also stuff down here. And the glory of the celestial is one kind of glory, and the glory of the terrestrial is another kind of glory. This almost seems like overkill, what he's doing. But it's good that he does it because it gets your mind making the right comparisons. And that's this whole point. Comparisons we fail to make when we think about resurrection. And why do we fail to make them? They're right there. Watch these, bounce these back off of one another. There's a glory of the sun. There's a glory of the moon. There's a glory of the stars. One star is different from another star in its glory. He's put glory in the celestial and ranks the glory in different ways. 42. So also, here comes resurrection, is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption, but it is raised in incorruption. Now, what was his comparison? Celestial, terrestrial. They're not the same thing. He said they have varying glories. He said, thus is resurrection. They go in as one glory, they come out as another glory. They don't go in as terrestrial and then get raised as better terrestrial. They go in as terrestrial and then get raised as celestial. They are not the same thing. This doesn't need this in order to be this. In other words, the celestial body doesn't need the ingredients of the terrestrial body. They are two entirely different bodies with two entirely different sets of glory. Sown in dishonor. What's sown in dishonor? The body. Raised in glory. What's raised in glory? The resurrected body. Sown into the terrestrial, raised into the celestial. sown into one realm, raised in another realm. Dies in one spot, lives in another spot. We're making the same comparisons. Sown in weakness, raised in power. Why weakness? Because no matter how good you are, how healthy you are, how well you eat, how well you work out, how long you live, you die. That's the weakness of being human. Paul's comparison, resurrected man, though, raised in power, not in the same weakness that he went into the ground. So whatever that man looks like doesn't look like that man. They aren't functioning in the same glory. 44. Sown as a natural body. Oh, it's getting better and better. Sown in a natural body. This, sown, planted. What's that? Buried. Died and buried. This, raised, spiritual. Game changed. Did you catch the analogy? Terrestrial, celestial. What's on the earth is not the same as what's in the heavens. Natural body, spiritual body. What's in the natural body is not the same as what's in the heavens. One here, one there. Natural body, spiritual body. So it is written, and now he quotes Genesis 2. The first Adam became a living being, end quote, inserts his own statement. And his own statement is, last Adam became a life-giving spirit. No one's ever said that before. That's new to the Bible. Think about what you just saw. The quoted line has been said many times. It's Torah. It's one of the opening lines of Torah. God breathed into the dirt, made man a life-giving spirit, made man a living soul. We quote that all the time because that's how we function in the earth. We have the breath of God in us. Now we're alive. We have a representation of God in us, but not the final product. The final product is the breath that came in that isn't going anywhere. That's going to live on. Why? Because God can't die. God is eternal. So what he breathed into man lives on. Why does the body die? Stock Christian answer, because of sin. The body dies because it's made out of dirt. It has to go back to dirt. It's terrestrial. Why does the spirit man not die? Because his breath came from the celestial. Two different worlds. So his spirit man can't die. How can it? God would have to die for the spirit man to die. And so the celestial lives on trapped in the terrestrial. It's why 2 Corinthians 5, Paul goes, we look forward to the mortal being swallowed up of immortality. He goes, when we take off this tent, he goes, we'll be swallowed up of immortality. What tent? The tent that's housing the celestial. The piece of me that's eternal, that's wrapped up in this non-eternal thing that breaks down and gets sick and gets old and gets droopy and gets wrinkly and gets gray and eventually dies, no matter how good I do with it. No matter what I do, it dies. Doesn't matter how healthy I am. Doesn't matter how I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't do stuff. I still die. I end up, why? Because I'm dirt. That's how I got started, and that's how I'm going to end. That's not the end of the story, though. This is the good news of resurrection. It's not the end of the story. Because the first man was a living being, the last man is a life-giving spirit. Here's how I see that. This is how I say it. The first man was a physical being. He's alive, sourced from the earth. The last man is not a physical being. He's alive, sourced from the heavens. I do it that way because I think the way Paul does it causes us to miss the comparison a little bit. Because Paul goes, one's the natural man, earthy. The other one's the spiritual man, heavenly. I think it hits harder if you go, one's a natural man, earthy. The other one's not a natural man, not earthy. It's the same thing. It hits a little harder. The other one's not a natural man. He's not earthy. He laid down his body. So scatter the ashes to the wind. God doesn't need them. Resurrected reality is the spirit man lives on into a dimension not trapped by this place. That was Paul's version of resurrection. And he went, that's what we get. And he said, that's good news. He even called that, if we had hope in this life only, we'd be of all men most miserable. Why? Because he goes, if all I had was this, He goes, this ain't worth it. But he goes, I don't only have this. I have something better. There's a weight of glory that I have that I get to step into. And so understand, I say all of that, part of it to excite your spirit about resurrection, because I think your spirit man should be excited about resurrection, because your spirit man isn't going to die. You're not going anywhere. Your spirit man is just going to move into the realm of where he is. I think it's why Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, because Paul went, if I get rid of this dirt man, the only thing left is to be with him. I'm in his dimension. I'm in his realm. He's the timeless one. He's eternal. I say all of that, yes, to excite your spirit. I also say it to really help us to understand what's going on at the tomb. Because the Jesus that's standing outside of the tomb is not the Jesus that went into the tomb. The Jesus that went into the tomb was a man. His spirit resurrects outside of that tomb. That is where Christ got what he asked for in John 17. Remember what he said? Father, restore unto me the glory that you and I had from the foundation of the world. Bring me back to where I was before I put this thing on. How do you get there? Jesus said, unless a seed of corn falls into the ground, seed of wheat falls into the ground, it can't, and die, it cannot bring forth much fruit. Father, I want the glory I had with you in the beginning. How are we going to get there? I got to get rid of this thing. Let me get to that cross. And Jesus knows this in a way, of course, he's Jesus. His link with the Father, he understands. There's a point in the ministry of Jesus where Jesus becomes laser focused to get to the cross. You've watched that happen in the Gospels where Jesus is healing and touching and he's sparing his own life by getting away from crowds. And then all of a sudden it's like, on my way to Jerusalem, that's where we're going. We got a job to do. And his disciples go, you can't go back there. You go back there, they're going to kill you. And Jesus goes, it's all right. I'm going. How does all of a sudden he just flip that switch and go, all right, it's time to die? There's that moment where the full reality of what the Father is asking him to do, to come back to the restoration of where you were before you put on that earth suit. If the Father tells you that, I think the next thing you're going is, how fast can we get rid of this earth suit? Yeah. And that's Jesus. That's Jesus walking in going, all right, let's go. This is that sacrifice. This is what I came to do, to lay this thing down in order to walk into the realm of where my Father and I are. But even better, I'm going to come out, I'm going to reveal myself to my disciples. I'm going to reveal myself to my church. She's going to become my bride. Her and I are going to become intimate and reproduce ourselves on the earth. That will be Dad's kingdom. That's how I'll do it. A little bit of me and a little bit of them goes a long, long way. And I'll be able to do that in every tongue and in every race and in every culture and in every generation and on every continent. Anywhere that will have intimacy with me and believe in me, I'll come in and sup with you and you with me. That's the message Jesus gives to the church in Revelation. What's he wanting to do? I want you and I to commune together. If we commune together, we participate in one another and we reproduce this on the earth. And then we don't get attached to the dirt. No, we don't want to die so that we go, but we can end up where Paul ends up. To live is Christ, man. To live is great, because living is I get to live out who he is on the earth. But to die, well, he goes, that's gain. Why? Because I've glimpsed the other side and I've seen what the other man looks like, and it ain't anything like this, and it's going to be okay. And that, to me, is why John lays out, they didn't recognize him, Because when they saw him, they weren't seeing a man from this dimension. This is why I do want you to wrangle with some of these drop-ins in John about the hands and the side and the feet. Because by the late 1st, early 2nd century, there was already a group of people who taught Jesus was not a real physical man. He was simply a spirit. History calls them Gnostics. Okay? This is an issue we'll get into when we get into 1 John. Gnosticism. And part of that argument was he didn't really raise from the dead. And so the argument became, there was work that was done from a sort of quote-unquote scholarly standpoint in that first and second century to do all that we could to make Jesus in his resurrected form as physical as Jesus was in his pre-death form. And Paul's theology of resurrection disagrees with them. Paul does not have resurrected bodies in their pre-death form. He has them in a celestial form. He says one is one and the other is another. And he goes, they are not the same thing. And one has a glory the other one doesn't have. And so we as Bible students kind of have to wrestle with that. You go, well, where should we land? Frankly, I don't care where we land on whether or not we believe that they touched his hands and his side. It doesn't matter to me where we land on that. To me, what matters is that we shift our understanding of resurrection and realize that the resurrected man is not the natural man. And resurrection is a must if we're going to continue in this thing called Christianity. That's my point. It's a must. To me, it's the deal breaker of the faith. Because it all goes back to what I said a moment ago. God takes dirt, makes a man out of it. That's nothing. I mean, he made trees. He made rocks. He made lions and tigers. He makes a man. Difference? He leans over and breathes in it. So he takes a piece of this, the heavens, the invisible, and he deposits it. Resurrection demands, scratch that. Eternity demands that resurrection is a reality, or God dies. Or you don't have God in you now. That's what we're left with. Okay? You either don't have God in you now, you're just wandering around out here in the universe on a little rock. You got lucky that all the atoms converged just right to put you into existence. So live it up, man, because you're only going around once, and then you're done, and go crazy. Or God really did breathe into the creation and lives on in that creation, and we get to experience that. That's why I can't be an atheist. I cannot accept that we just made it and that there was no design, no breath of God in us. And our destiny is just to do the best we can do while we're here, and then we're gone, and then, No. Resurrected reality. So when Mary turns around, she sees a man, she doesn't know who it is. It's Jesus. What's it going to take to really get this through to Mary? John 20:15. Jesus says, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" That doesn't do it. She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I'll take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," which is to say, teacher. Okay, something happens. Jesus says a long sentence to her, asks her a question, she doesn't get it. No revelation of resurrection. And then Jesus says her name. And when he says her name, something happens. There's this click inside. Now, there's a little something, original Greek text here. She said to him, and there's two words right here in the Greek that don't appear in your English. She said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means that he must have spoken to her in Hebrew, her native tongue, not Greek, which a gardener would have. So part of the recognition comes from the familiarity of that voice, of the way he said her name. She then responds in Hebrew, Rabboni. But Rabboni, which is to say teacher, and that's a shoddy landing spot for Rabboni, because we don't really have a real firm grasp on the old ancient Hebrew word Rabboni, but it's closer to great master than it is teacher. It was far more a salutation of worship than it was honor for a teacher. And so it's not even master, it's great master. And there is an element of teacher there, but for the most part, she lavishes worship on Jesus in this moment. We shouldn't be shocked that it took her name to turn her. Jesus had already told us this, John 10:3. We were here a long time ago. To him, the doorkeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. So what had already been set up with in the book of John, and we didn't see this. It took 10 chapters. He preluded this 10 chapters ago. When he speaks to his sheep, he calls them by name. When you call someone by name, you know them. It's not, hey, you. Hey, you could be like, I still hadn't learned your name. What's up, champ? How you doing, chief? What's up, boss? I don't know who you are. I'm getting all this local, colloquialisms to try and throw you off the track that I haven't bothered to learn your name yet. Your name denotes some form of, at least someone took the time to think about it. It denotes some form of intimacy. So I think Mary's revelation of Jesus had nothing to do with scars, nothing to do with wounds in the natural. Because Mary's revelation doesn't wait on this and this. Okay? She didn't know who he was until she heard her name. Jesus is in his heavenly form, so it's going to take more than that. What was recognizable was not how Jesus looked, because Jesus' essence was the same. And if anything lives on into the next dimension, it's not this. It's this. It's this. It's what constitutes who we are inside, that essence that makes it into that new man. Because that essence is what makes us like him. When God walks all the animals past Adam, and he's looking for a helper, remember? Here comes all the animals. Pick one, God says, to be your helper. Adam can't find a helper. And so God puts Adam to sleep and pulls a helper from his side. Why couldn't he find a helper? Why not man's best friend? Here comes the dog. Why can't he? Because the dog doesn't have the essence of the Father in him. It's going to take another human. And so where does God pull them from? From in here. And so from inside comes Eve, and then there's that intimacy. It's because the spark of the divine didn't live in dogs, cats, lions, tigers, bears. The spark of the divine lived in Adam. He was it. So if I'm going to have another version, it's going to have to come from Adam. And that's why then marriage becomes such a big deal, because it reunites that piece of us that we'd lost. It brings two to one as a great typology of man and his union with God, and that allegory of Adam with Eve, that story of Adam with Eve. And so the essence of who Adam is found in Eve. So the essence of who God is found in your fellow man. Paul caught that. Remember his message at Athens? Statue to the unknown God. And he goes, hey, God is not very far from you. In him we live and we breathe and we move and we have our being. And none of you are saved, but I still said it anyway. Because that's the essence of God. And it's in us. And so the essence moves into the next dimension. That's what Mary sees. How he loved was how he was recognized. He used her name. That denoted intimacy. It denoted familiarity. It denoted knowledge. When she heard her name, she knew what she was dealing with. Because this was the Jesus she remembered, even though the Jesus she's looking at is not the Jesus she remembered. It's the essence of who Jesus was that comes over into the resurrected man. That's what we take with us. We don't take this. You're not going to want this. You're not going to need this. You're going to have a resurrected man. And you go, what will I look like? Miss the point. Maybe even, it's not even the point. Maybe looking like is not a phrase that can be used in the realm of the celestial. You're thinking in natural terms because you're using natural eyes. But in the realm of supernatural eyes, we know as we are known. How are we known? Not by how we look, but by who we are. And who we are is what we will know one another by in that next realm and in that next place. All right. John 20:17. Back to the story. Jesus said to her, don't cling to me. I've not yet ascended to my Father. Go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Now, I want to deal just real quickly. I didn't give you an additional screen for this. I just wanted to bring up my own background of interpretation with this text. I was raised on the King James, and in that phrase, it says, do not touch me, I've not yet ascended to my Father. And do not touch me, I've not yet ascended to my Father, led us down a rabbit trail theologically in which we asked the following question. I remember it many, many times. What would have happened if Mary Magdalene had touched Jesus in the garden before he ascended to the Father? Now, the way we were reading it was that Jesus had died, raised from the dead, but had not yet went into the heavens because we had a resuscitated corpse. Body died, body came back. And that he had been laying there. But then he came back, and he had not yet taken the blood to his Father. And that if Mary touches him, without him having taken the blood to his Father, it taints the sacrifice. And we'd go, I think if she had grabbed hold of him, she had touched him, he'd had to went back and do it all over again. Okay. No. Terrible exegesis of Scripture. Okay? Let me tell you why. First of all, the reason that we were spouting that is because we actually believed, and many still do, that sin is more powerful than the finished work of Jesus. Jesus had died on the cross, raised from the dead, and a woman touching his arm could reverse the entire finished work process. He'd have to start all over again. How powerful do you think you are? Okay? You have just become the centerpiece of the gospel message. Like you can affect the cross doesn't work because she grabbed hold. No. Part of it was just a poor translation. The New King James gets closer. Even that doesn't do well because the English can't really get it. It's a present tense word that doesn't have much to do with touching. It has a lot to do with holding on to something. Don't delay me. Don't grab hold of me in this form. This form doesn't belong on the earth. You don't get to have me like this, like you had me like that. This isn't the way this is going to be, Mary. It's not going to be me in a resurrected body running around with you guys. No. Now, she can't possibly know the reason why. The reason why is because I am going to enter into your life through the Holy Spirit. You need Pentecost. And when He comes, He shall lead and guide you into all truth. He shall tell you things that I cannot tell you. He shall glorify me. He shall not speak of His own. I and my Father are one. I and my Father are going to make our mansion inside of you. We are going to take up residence in you. It isn't going to work, Mary, that I exist in your dimension in this form. What's going to work, Mary, is I'm going to exist inside of my church, not outside of my church. So don't hold on to this. This is temporary. You get to see it now, but this isn't the end game for you. So no, it's not, ooh, if she had touched him, reversal. No. It's not proper. And it doesn't make any theological sense either. That led us off into a lot of trails. And then we had to come up with a bunch of stuff as to Jesus physically taking the blood up to heaven and walking it up to God. And it's not tainted because no one touched me, So, but I don't buy that. And it's a improper translation, and it's just plain bad theology in regards to the finished work of Jesus. So, don't hold on. Why? Remember, there's a visual representation of the ark only a few feet away from Mary Magdalene. It's in the back of the tomb. 2 angels, one at the foot, one at the head, top of the Ark of the Covenant, inside of an empty tomb. That tomb now becomes a brand new Holy of Holies, angels sitting on each side. To ascend to the Father is to move through the heavenly realm to where God is. Jesus told her, I'm going to ascend to the Father. What's that mean? I ask you a question. For Israel, where does God live? For Israel of Jesus' day, where did God reside? Heaven on earth at the temple. But where in the temple? Holy of Holies. Behind the veil. Only the high priest gets to go through there. But every time the high priest went in, he had to pass through heaven on earth to get to the veil. this is the way they would have said it, he had to pass through the heavenlies to get behind the veil to speak to the image of God at the Ark of the Covenant. Jesus has just established a brand new Ark of the Covenant. It's a new coffin. He's put everything inside of that coffin. And he is saying to Mary, this isn't going to work where you exist on seeing me in this other realm. Instead, I have to pass through the heaven. I have to ascend to the Father so that we can do what needs to be done. Here's how the New Testament interprets that. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Seeing that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. That verse doesn't mean we have a Jesus who went zip and ascended up into heaven and then disappeared. We're writing to Hebrews. And Hebrews have Torah history. And in Torah history, to pass through the heavens was when the priest walked through the temple and snuck back behind the veil and then encountered God face to face. So when he says, we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, what he's saying is that when Jesus ascended into the realm of the invisible, when he stopped being visible and became invisible, he went through the heavenly tabernacle so that he could step behind the heavenly veil, and so that because of that, we get to hold fast to our confession of who we are. We aren't required to pass through the heavens because we have a high priest that's already passed through the heavens. We already have someone who's taken care of this on our behalf. 15. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. He was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Who's that? Jesus. When was that? Jesus in his earthly form. He doesn't pass through the heavenlies until he's already experienced all of our weaknesses, until he knows what it's like to be us. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Here's what I think he says. Dad, you got to forgive them. It ain't easy being them. I know. I've tried for 33 years, and it ain't easy being human. It hurts, and there's pain, and there's doubt, and there's fear, and there's stress, and this body aches, and they get mad, and they lose their temper, and then they have people taken from them, and it's like their heart gets ripped out. And it ain't easy being them. So I'm going to feel everything they feel right here on this cross. I'm going to feel murder and abandonment and rape and pain and violence and anger and injustice. I'm going to be crushed and bruised and abused. I'm going to be made fun of, mocked, laughed at, falsely accused. I have to be, so that I can walk through the heavenlies as them and step behind the veil and stand in front of you so that they can confess and profess to be sons of God. Because I can't ask them to step through the heavenlies like this. This is impossible. So I'm going to die on their behalf. And then when I'm raised up as a new man, we'll step through the heavenlies and I'll boldly come to you. And then therefore, they get to come boldly to the first usage in the Bible, throne of grace. Before, it had always been two angels and the things covered in blood. Don't you dare touch it. Because if you touch it, you're going to die. But Dad, I'm going to step through the veil so that I almost messed this up today. I was quoting it and I was saying we get to go boldly. And the Holy Spirit said, no, you don't. You get to come boldly because I'm inviting you. So, and the wording is important. You get to come boldly. Because I'm not mad at you. I'm not ticked off at you. I'm not disappointed in you. I'm welcoming you saying, son, daughter, come up here. Don't worry, it's a throne of grace. I have good things for you. I have nothing but good to give to you. You get to obtain mercy and find grace to help when? In time of need. You know what I love about this? It tells me it's okay to be needy. You get to need as a person and not feel like you're faithless. This garbage that we have, that we've been taught that says, well, there should be no need. You be walking in such favor. You don't have any need. Your Father doesn't leave you with any need. But what? There's needs in this life. And I bring my needs to Jesus. And I go, I have a need. And here it is. And I'm not scared to bring it to you. And I don't look faithless because I have needs. I have needs because I'm human. But that doesn't stop you from asking me to come up a little higher to the throne of grace. And that's why I'm here. Jesus passed through the heavenlies, so I get to pass through the veil and celebrate great master at the feet of the man who knows my name. Isn't that good news? The mercy seat. Also quoted in the Septuagint, by the way. Septuagint, Greek translation of the Old Testament. They don't use the word mercy seat in the Septuagint. They use the word propitiation. The propitiation is covered in blood, but it has become a throne of grace. In the greater context of the passage from Hebrews 4, and I know we're pushing it on time, we are invited to step into the empty tomb and experience the fullness of what has been done on our behalf. I never could say that right today. Here's what I'm thinking. We are invited to step into the empty tomb and face the mercy seat and then turn around and go out and meet the gardener in a new creation. And when you get out there, he says your name. Come on, son. Come on, daughter. I know you. I recognize you. Let's go on a great adventure. No, it's not going to be easy. It's okay, though. Any trouble you get into, run back over there to the throne of grace. Spend a little time there. This represents the gateway to a whole new world. And I know your name. My sheep know my voice because I call them by name. It's good news. There is a greater context. Here's what I think the greater context is. When I taught the book of Hebrews, I called this Let Us Times 3. This was our subtitle that night. Let Us Times 3, meaning there were 3 let uses. And I always see a head of lettuce in my mind when I see that title. But it's a different let us. Hebrews 4:11, Hebrews 4:14, Hebrews 4:16. The author gives you these for a reason. 4:11, let us labor to enter into rest. 4:14, let us hold fast our confession. 4:16, let us come boldly to the throne of grace. If you do these, you're doing these all the time, but you can be aware of them and actively be participating. Labor to enter into rest is not do a bunch of work and then take a nap. It's that you're going to have to labor to enter into rest because no one's going to let you rest in Christianity. They're always going to be trying to throw things on you. They're always going to be trying to throw performance on you and works on you and stuff. You're going to have to work to rest. You're going to have to work to not be burdened underneath the weight of performance expectations. And what do you do when you rest? Hold fast to your profession. What's your profession? Jesus has passed through the heavenlies on my behalf. Jesus has allowed me to come to the throne of grace. That's my profession. And then what? Whatever I got, whatever I need, wherever I fail, wherever my problems are, I get to come boldly to the throne of grace. There's no limits for that. Last verse, 2018. Mary Magdalene came, told the disciples she had seen the Lord. He had spoken these things to her. I do want to say time out. I did not comment on this phrase. Tell them I'm going to my God and your God and my Father and their Father. And you're thinking, oh, that was good preaching material. We missed it. We're saving it. And I'm going to save it for Thomas, because Thomas puts his hand in there and goes, my Lord and my God. And we're going to pull what Jesus told Mary that he was going to do, and we're going to put it in the Thomas story, and that'll be a couple weeks away. So we didn't skip it because it's not worth talking about. We skipped it because we don't have time to talk about it, and I want to save it for another lesson. So we end here. Mary Magdalene came, told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. And next week, we will start the journey into the locked room where the disciples gathered together for fear of the Jews on resurrection night. What an sad beginning to the Christian story. Is night number 1 of resurrected reality. Lock the doors, don't let anybody in. Sadly enough, in some circles, not much has changed. Lock the doors, don't let anybody in. It's a new world. All right, we're going to unlock that door next week, and wherever it is locked, Jesus can step through walls. That'll be the point of our lesson. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for once again this wonderful experience we get to have every week where we try to shine the spotlight on you, and when we do it, something happens where all the stuff from the world just falls away, and our hearts rejoice, and our spirit man stands at attention. And it is such a fun experience to have that experience with my friends. And I pray we have done justice to the beauty of Jesus. Where we have not, where we have failed, we just pray your Holy Spirit make up for that. Where we succeeded, we know it was all you. May you build on that, grow that, water that, cultivate that, to where we hold fast our profession. We thank you for what you do, what you've done. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Amen.